these violinists that haven't made it to world famous status, that have attained semi-famous status. Perhaps the cognoscenti have heard about them, or you may come across them, you may stumble on them as you're leafing through an old issue of the Strad magazine. But not so many people have heard about them. Well, Isolde Menges was such a semi-famous fiddler with world-class technique and talent. So she kind of flew under the radar a little. Perhaps she was better known in the UK in her day, but as time passes, probably less and less people will know about her. How did I come to hear about Isolde Menges? Well, it just so happens that my violin teacher, Ronaldo de Lima, we used to call him Ron, people used to call him Ron de Lima, had a number of teachers himself. So they included Colin Sawyer, Michael Zabudov. Perhaps the most famous of his teachers was Alfredo Campoli. He spent quite a while with Campoli, but also he went to Isolde Menges for lessons. There were others, of course, that he would rub shoulders with in masterclasses, such as Ricci and Dartington several times. But he actually went to Isolde Menges for lessons. Now, that was an enriching experience for him because obviously Ron de Lima was a massive Heifetz fan. He infused that into me. And of course, Isolde Menges was with Heifetz in the hour class. Now, from what I've gathered from reading Arthur Wexler-Vered's book, that probably would have happened when Leopold Auer held his summer classes, I think in Scandinavia or Germany, something like that. We're talking around maybe 1916, maybe 1917, before Heifetz fled Russia for the US to escape the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. Heifetz and Isolde Menges were in the same class with Leopold Auer. And so the only she must have related many experiences to Ron about Heifetz, but the only one I can recall, because Ron has passed away now, I can't go to him for the other ones, is an anecdote about Heifetz when he was messing about with a ball. And I've made a video on that, which I've copied into this channel. It was originally in my other YouTube channel, and it's got over 4,000 views, gradually increasing in views as time goes on, because I originally posted that video in 2023. I'll leave a link to the video. I'll also leave a link to my tribute to Ron de Lima. He's not a super well-known person outside of Milton Keynes, but he was, in my opinion, a superb violin pedagogue, and if he connected with the right student, if the student had the right brain for it, he would let them into his vast knowledge of Jascha Heifetz and the violin world. And here we're talking about cognoscenti, so that's not pearls that you throw before swine, of course, and not the average person just can't tune into that world, it has to be said. So that's the novelty of it. But also, as well as being a violinist, diploma standard, excellent sight reading and leading orchestras, also was taught conducting by Alfredo Campoli, went through the complete Paganini with Campoli. I don't think he went through the Bach with Paganini, with Campoli, but he went through the Paganini with Campoli, which is great because that's Italian. But as well as all that, being a teacher, a violin teacher for his career, for over many decades, and also the thing that's amazing about Ron is him going into deprived schools like the Lakes Estate and churning out grade 8 students from that. That's what I think is one of his greatest accomplishments. As well as all that, Ron was a luthier, so he took courses in violin making. I wish now I'd been able to buy one of his violins that he made, because he was becoming quite good. I don't know if he got around to making a viola. He would carve music stands as well. He was super gifted, very artistic, painter, acting, just very artistic and unusual in that he was Indian, although he liked to turn his back on that heritage. More talk about being Portuguese perhaps, but he looked very Indian, and he was from Goa, born during the days of the British Raj. So this video though is not about Ron de Lima, so I'm going to let you watch my tribute video to him about that. It's about Isolde Menges. But it's through Ron going to her for lessons that I came to know about her. And I'd like to relate a story. Sorry, there is another story. So the anecdote about Heifetz, but there's a story about Ron's experience with Isolde Menges and him relating to me how by the time he was... I've just thought of another story, so let me relate two more about Isolde Menges. By the time Ron was going to her, she was getting rather ancient. She was very old, and her fingers were kind of all deformed from arthritis. And Ron relates how she picked up a violin and demonstrated the Bach. Despite all of her arthritis and her limitations, apparently it just sounded... it just blew him away. It was just something else. But she bowed to Heifetz. She said, we all knew in the class that Heifetz was something else. But the fact that she could demonstrate Bach, even in old age, and amaze Ron, just shows how much the violin had become part of her very being. As you'd expect of any student coming out of the Leopold Auer class from that time. But then the other story was that she said, I'm glad I'm going to die soon because all the violinists today sound the same. I've talked about that phenomenon in other videos. Most recently, I think I touched on it when I did the video about the little girl from Korea playing Waxman Carmen Fantasy. And I just make a point about how, as technically brilliant as violinists are today, you can't actually, turn on the radio when you're driving in your car and instantly recognise who the violinist is, like you can with Chrysler, Elman, Heifetz, Menuhin, probably Ricci, Milstein, that mercurial silvery sound that he has. You can recognise these guys because before the advent of air travel, there were isolated schools of violin teaching. In the case of Isolde Menges, perhaps you could say she was a product of the English school, which is from here, and the Russian school through Leopold Auer and his influence, although from what I gather she wasn't with him for a great length of time. So here, actually, just looking at this Strad article, maybe I've got something a little wrong in what I said at the outset, so let's correct that. Early life, Isolde Marie Menges was born to violinist parents on the 16th of May 1893 in Hove, Sussex. Her German father and English mother ran a music school in nearby Brighton, so it was natural for the young Menges to follow in their footsteps, so born into a musical family. After considerable groundwork provided by her parents, the young prodigy gave her first recital from memory at the age of 3.5. She then worked with Emile Sauret and Leon Sammartini in London, and in 1909, at the age of 16, Menges left England and entered the class of the legendary Leopold Auer in St. Petersburg. She was in the class in St. Petersburg then. It wasn't just the summer camp. So where the experience with Heifetz bouncing the ball and getting told off by Auer, see the video because it has a fantastic end. Only a short story, but a little gem, which I don't think you can read about anywhere. I'm lucky to have had that story from Ron. So she must have been, she was in the class in Russia. We're talking before the 1917 revolution. So it was among the vanguard of Auer's pupils, but also considered by him to be one of the most gifted. Why didn't she become more famous, is the question. Should have gone to America, then she would have been famous, I think. Of course, all of these violinists were eclipsed by Jascha Heifetz. That's just how it was. Here we go. So I'm learning as I go along here. She continued to study with Auer every summer at his retreat in Christiania, Norway, until he emigrated to the US in 1918. Okay, so she would have, 1909, when did Heifetz enter the hour class? Let's just look that up. I have here that Heifetz entered the Leopold hour class in 1910. So that, if that's the case, then she was already an established student in the class before Heifetz arrived, and she would have continued to, after she left, she would have continued to meet with Heifetz in the summer camps. So I guess I was partly right, until Heifetz left for the US in that infamous journey right across Russia by train, and then Japan and steamboat across to San Francisco or LA or wherever, and then right across the US to end up in New York. That epic journey that Heifetz made was in 1917. The Carnegie Hall appearance by Heifetz was in 1917. So perhaps Menges was still seeing out in Europe before he himself emigrated to the US a year later. It says here she worked briefly with the noted pedagogue Carl Flesch. Made her debut at the Queen's Hall on February 1913, playing the Tchaikovsky Concerto. That concerto was originally dedicated to Leopold Auer, but he refused to premiere it because he said it was too hard. I think he later came round to the concerto, so another soloist premiered that. Then she performed at the New Queen's Hall with the New Queen's Hall Orchestra under Henry Wood, the London Symphony Orchestra under Bruno Walter, as well as with the Royal Philharmonic Society, performing staples from the repertoire, such as the Beethoven Concerto, the Brahms, but also the Wieniawski-Glazunov. Now, Glazunov was, I think he was the head of the school or in St. Petersburg, something like that. I have to double check. But Heifetz actually encountered Glazunov in his time in St. Petersburg, so I guess Isolde Menges would have too. Performances of the Lalo Symphony Espagnole with Ernest Bloch conducting, and further performances of the Beethoven and Brahms concertos with Mengelberg and his Concertgebouw. She made a successful American debut in 1916 and decided to remain there during the remainder of the First World War. So why didn't she become massively famous then? Was it because it was wartime? This is partly due to the fact that her loyalty to Great Britain was called into question because of her German heritage through her father's side. That's unfortunate, yeah. Well, what about the royal family then? Battenbergers. In 1918, she spent several months teaching in Canada. After the war was over, returned back to England in 1919 and married the composer Harold Todd Boyd, with whom she had a son. So maybe there are descendants of Isolde Menges around today. Having said that, had she stayed in America, she might have been more famous. Maybe not strictly true, because Heifetz students are kind of what I would call semi-famous. Fodor and Erich Friedman and aka I guess these people, Sherry Kloss, they're not super world famous people. They're semi-famous, aren't they? So maybe it doesn't follow that everyone is going to become as famous as Itzhak Perlman, for example. Who knows? She was an annual guest soloist at Henry Wood's proms in Britain, performed numerous works by British composers, and gave the UK premiere of Ernst von Donyahi's Violin Concerto No. 1 in 1923. She also participated in chamber music. In 1931, she founded the Menges Quartet with Ivor James, Beatrice Corral, second violin, and John Dyer on viola, featuring Beethoven regularly in their concertos. The Menges Quartet was one of the first to present the composer's complete 16 quartet cycle before the Second World War. Menges was concerned about the future of music education in Britain way back then. Now it's a far worse state now. Should be turning in her grave. And gave hundreds of free concerts to school children. In 1931, she joined the staff of the Royal College of Music, where she remained for nearly 40 years. So really dedicated to her art and to passing on the baton, teaching the up-and-coming violinists of the future. This is where the US is way ahead of the UK, in my opinion, in terms of music in education. They produce so many talented young musicians in America compared to here. We've let it slip, I think. After her retirement from teaching in 1969, the college established a prize in her name. I have to look into that then, the Isolde Menges Prize. Is that still going? And she played a violin made in 1714 by Guarneri Filius Andrea, the father of Del Gesù. So, damn good violin. Not a Del Gesù, but nevertheless. Definitely in the top 10 violin makers of all time, which she kept until her death on 30th of January 1976 in Richmond, Surrey. So I was born in 77, obviously. Ron was going to her for lessons before I was born, since she passed away a year before I was born. This beautiful painting of her, and we can make a little foray into her recordings here. So one interesting person, an interesting life, living in tumultuous times through 2 world wars, spending time in the New World in Russia before, Tsarist Russia, before it came apart. And then, teaching people like Ron, being happy to just be a violin teacher at the Royal Academy. But still able to make a career from her art, which is a wonderful thing. So have a listen to her recordings. You maybe not going to find that many, but there will be some available to listen to on YouTube. So that was the violinist Isolde Menges. Ciao for now.